Russia's war on Ukraine has emerged as the most likely stumbling block to G20 nations agreeing to a joint statement at their summit in India that starts tomorrow. Reports say progress has been made on some issues such as climate change, but division over the Ukraine crisis is preventing a consensus being reached. And fears are growing that leaders will not be able to agree on a declaration, marking a first in the bloc's history. The absence of Russian President Vladimir Putin and Chinese leader Xi Jinping has complicated the process, although China, represented at the New Delhi meeting by Premier Li Qiang, says it is ready to work with all parties.
首先，中方历来高度重视20国集团，并积极参与相关的活动。那么，在这次的为了筹备这次的新德里峰会呢，中方代表团也本着积极和建设性的态度参与这个文件的磋商和讨论。我们愿同各方一道，根据协商一致原则，推动新德里峰会取得积极成果。
Our leaders of the world's 20 wealthiest countries have begun arriving in the Indian capital. Prime Minister Narendra Modi is set to hold bilateral meetings with more than 15 of them on the sidelines of the summit. Officials say they will include leaders of the United States, Britain, Bangladesh, Turkey and Germany. The two-day summit marks the first time Asia's economic juggernaut, India, will be playing host. Despite reports of the Ukrainian issue blocking negotiations, New Delhi says its joint declaration is almost ready and will be recommended to leaders for their approval. It's described the statement as, quote, the voice of the global south. And for more, Ishan Garg reports live from New Delhi. Ishan, tell us more about this joint declaration. What are the chances of it being ratified at the summit?
Well, this joint declaration is likely to include a lot of the issues that India has been talking about in the previous year during its entire presidency. For example, the issues of the global south, the inclusion potentially of the African Union in the G20 grouping as well. And there's also going to be likely mentions of climate change, how the different countries can tackle it, how can they finance it, and probably even some language about how the developed nations can potentially help the developing world in solving the problem of debt, in solving the problems of funding crunching. That could likely be all in the joint declaration, if there is going to be a joint declaration. That is a big if, because there is one potential issue that is likely to derail this conversation, which is Russia's war in Ukraine. Because of this conflict, there hasn't been a joint declaration issued by this grouping since India assumed the presidency of G20, and it's likely that this issue is likely to throw up roadblocks once again. And the concerns are already being raised by international leaders, including U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, and also by European Council President Charles Michel.
Just observing that last time when we had the last meeting of the G20, we succeeded and we had a common statement, we had a declaration, and I'm observing that for some countries it seems to be more difficult today to agree on a clear position, condemning and also sanctioning Russia for this decision to launch this war against Ukraine.
India has been walking a diplomatic tightrope as it tries to maintain cordial ties with its biggest defense partner, Russia, as well as with Western countries. And at the G20 summit, it may be likely that we will see India walking that diplomatic tightrope once again.
All right, Ishan, of course, as you have been speaking, we have been showing footage of the different leaders arriving in New Delhi. Give us a sense of the mood where you are.
Well, the mood is absolutely jovial. The country has never seen such a massive gathering of world leaders. 20 members of the G20 grouping, along with 11 other invitees and the heads of United Nations, World Health Organization, the International Labour Organization. So a lot of important political personalities descending in Delhi, who are all being greeted at the airport by a dance troupe that is displaying various ethnic local Indian dances right at the airport. airport. And then we've also got a number of restrictions in New Delhi to ensure security in the national capital. Over the weekend, we are going to see very tight security with most roads blocked across the national capital, most businesses not allowed to operate, and people have also been asked to stay at home during the next 2 days. This city has been divided into two zones, essentially. The controlled zone, which is the central part of the city movement, is going to be extremely restricted here. But many of the citizens have said that if this summit becomes a success, which many are already seeing it as becoming a success, they say they don't mind any problems that they might face in moving around the city for a little bit.
Thanks to Asian Garg reporting live just there from New Delhi.
The US President Joe Biden will hold one-on-one talks with G20 host Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. The White House says that the meeting will take place at Mr. Modi's residence instead of at the Prime Minister's office. The two leaders are looking to bolster ties amid shared concerns over China. The White House is expecting progress on a deal for General Electric to partner with India's state-owned Hindustan Aeronautics to make engines for Indian fighter jets in India. Mr. Biden is also seeking to counter China's Belt and Road global infrastructure push. He will be pitching Washington as an alternative partner for developing countries at the G20, especially in the Indo-Pacific region. Reports say that the US, India and Saudi Arabia are discussing a possible infrastructure deal that could reconfigure trade between the Gulf and South Asia. This will link Middle Eastern countries by railways and connect to India by port.
Our Indonesian President Joko Widodo says he plans to be the voice for developing nations at the G20 summit. Indonesia was the group's president last year. Jakarta was originally meant to host the summit this year, but decided to swap terms with India due to the overlap with its ASEAN chairmanship. Mr. Widodo wrapped up that three-day regional summit yesterday. Ahead of this weekend's talks, he pledged to advocate for the interests of the developing world, as well as promote the downstream processing policy. This policy gives developing countries the right to process their own natural resources at home, rather than exporting them raw. Mr. Widodo has long supported the policy, with adherence to it believed to benefit the Indonesian economy. The country's ban on unprocessed nickel ore has ruffled some feathers in the international arena, the EU filing a lawsuit against Indonesia at the World Trade Organization, claiming this ban could harm stainless steel production in Europe.
Singapore Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong will also be going to New Delhi to attend the G20 summit. This comes at the invitation of this year's host, India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Mr. Lee will participate in discussions about the importance of rules-based multilateralism, sustainable development, health and energy transition, among others. On the sidelines of the summit, Mr. Lee will also be meeting other leaders. During Mr. Lee's absence, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Finance Lawrence Wong will be acting Prime Minister.